As a business intelligence analyst, I'm constantly using dynamic date functions to query windows of time. Depending on what I'm working on, I definitely need to use different types of time frames, and so dynamic date functions are where it's at. Now, one of the things I stumbled onto early on in my career is our company had a sheet of all of these dynamic date functions that are pretty common and specific to SQL Server. So just keep that in mind if you're watching this video. These dynamic date functions are specifically for SQL Server and will only work on there. Now, I've got them here, so I'm going to go ahead and just open this up. Now, I do want to share the love here, so I'm going to go ahead and share this resource with you. You can find that in the video description. And again, I use this all the time, so hopefully you find this super valuable. You'll see here that all of these are using getDate, and that is what makes these dynamic. It's basically taking today's date, and then it's extrapolating different dates based on what the current date is. And once again, these are super handy, super helpful when you're querying data. I use them in my job all the time. And so I'm going to show you what those look like and kind of talk through some of the ones that are more common, ones that I use pretty frequently in my own work as a BI analyst. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and run this. And we're going to connect to our database. Now, we don't actually query any data from our database in this case, but we do need to connect to it so we can access SQL Server and these different functions. So that's what we're doing there. So right away, you can see it is the 25th today when I'm recording. Excuse me, the 27th today when I'm recording. And you can see that the prior day is the 26th, right? So we've got the prior day on there. This one is common for data that is loaded the previous day. If you need to query specifically for what was added yesterday, that is what I use that one most often for. There is a variation of this, the second one here, future day. You can play around with that a little bit if you do some negative numbers here. As you can see, we've got -7. That's going to put it 7 days into the future. So in this case, 7 days from now, which is the 27th of February, that will put it at March 6th. These next 8 dynamic date functions are week functions. So they'll give you a window of different types of weeks. And you can see there's different ones starting with Monday to Sunday, and then from Sunday to Saturday, just depending on how you want to query the data. Now, I typically use these functions for assessing sales performance, comparing the previous week with the current week, or different time frames like that. So these are the dynamic week functions that we have, and you can see them all up here. And I just want to make a note here, and this is maybe goes without saying, but I wouldn't recommend memorizing these functions. The nice thing about having this as just a reference sheet is you can pull it up, you can find the functions that you need, and then you can just use them. There may be times where you need to modify certain functions or you need to make some more custom functions. It might just depend on the situation, but I definitely don't recommend that you commit any of these to memory. You're certainly welcome to dive in and kind of explore a little bit more how these work, but that's my recommendation. Anyway, with that said, those are the week functions. We do have another function down here that allows you to add or remove months. So if you're adding months in this case, it's going to take the current date, and then we're going to push it 6 months into the future. And let's just scroll over so we can see what that looks like. 6 months from February 27th is obviously going to be, that looks like August 27th. So that one's working that way. If you want to remove months and go backwards in time, you can put a negative symbol in front of there. So it says dateadd, but you're actually removing dates in this case. And that will put you 2 dates in the past. These next functions are really some of the more crucial ones that I use. Oftentimes when I'm looking at performance for either a sales team or whatever else I'm querying, I'm often looking in the current month and looking at the beginning of the month to the end of the month. So that's these next 2 functions here. We've got the start of the current month. So again, we're in February, so it's basically just taking everything back to the very first day. And you can see on the time there, it also just puts it to 0 hours. So very much specific to the very beginning of the month. And then same thing for end of current month. It's going to push that to the end of the month, which is incidentally tomorrow. But those are super valuable functions that I use for current performance, looking at the current month window. There's also a way to look at the previous month, and that's another one that I use pretty commonly. Once again, this one's looking for start of last month. So same concept, different month, previous month. And so those two will give me the time frames and the windows for the previous month. Okay, so we will move on to the start of the next month. Now, let's see where that is here. Okay, it's right here. So I've sort of refrained from going into a lot of detail on how these functions actually work, and I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but you can tell that with the start of next month here, that we're basically just taking and adding an extra month on there. So if you look at the other functions, you'll notice they're very similar. In this case, we have a plus sign, and then we're adding one more month to it. Whereas on the other ones, we're subtracting a month, and then on the current month, we just have a 0 there. So they're very similar. And to this point, you could basically get the start of any month, just depending on where you want to go. You can either go back in time, or you can go into the future. It's just a matter of what type of window you want to look at. So this one will give you, again, the start of the next month. This is handy for instances where you may have future dates and expectations that need to be fulfilled. For example, if you have online orders coming in that need to be shipped out within, the next month, within, in our case, March, right? If we have expected fulfillment that needs to be reported, we can do that by calling this function and capture everything that needs to happen in the next month. Okay. The next section is about quarters. So you can kind of see a progression here. We started with day, week, month, and now we're headed into quarters. So you can also query based on quarter values. Now these are particularly helpful when you're doing financial type data. And so in this case, if you want to get the start of the current quarter, you can do that with this function here. And so that's what that one looks like. And then the end of the quarter will correctly capture that first quarter, right? So we've got the start of the current and end of the current. And then in the same token, we can look at the start of the previous quarter, which in our case was back in 2024, and look to that previous quarter as well, and kind of use those as a time frame window. Okay, same thing with start of next and end of next quarter. I won't go into any more detail because you probably get the idea there. Okay, the final step is the year window. So there's a window of time where maybe you want to look at the current year to the end of the year, or you want to look at previous year performance, and you can do that through all of these functions that are right here. Now, I haven't really gone over how these functions are actually used, and perhaps that's maybe a bit more helpful. So why don't we go ahead and we'll just on the fly query from our database. Now, I do have a small database here that I'm using, and why don't we just use this users table here? This might be a good one to query from. Yeah, I just want to make sure we have a date here. This is just randomized data. This isn't like real or anything like that. You can see we have a few different, years that it's spanning. Got some 2022 and 2023 data. We'll make that work, and we're going to go ahead and come back to our query window here. Actually, why don't we just go off this one here? And what you would do when you want to use these different window functions, most commonly you'll probably want to use them within the where statement. So when you're trying to filter data, that's a very common place for them to be. You also might want to include them in the select statement as well. So why don't we do a little bit of both here? So I'm going to grab this one, the prior day, and we're just going to say that this data loads every night. We're going to make that assumption. And we're going to call this the extract date. Okay, and the extract date in this context just means that it's the prior day's data. Let's go ahead and come down here now to the where statement, and I'm going to say where date created is between, and then we need to do some windows here, right? So let's go ahead and try to grab one here. Why don't we take a look at, where's one of the year ones here? There we go. We're going to say start of last year. So we're going to grab this guy here. And then it's giving me some helpers here because I've got Copilot stuck on here. Maybe I should shut that off. And then we're going to look at the end of last year, right? So let's go ahead and run this. We've got a valid query here. Just clean this up just a little bit. Make sure we're pulling in all records. And let's go ahead and run that. Okay, and since we looked at the date created timestamps, you could see that there was no data that happened in 2024. So we're going to modify this just a little bit. And what we're going to do here is we're going to remove, rather than just 1 year back, we're going to go 2 years back. So let's go ahead and modify these. So now we're looking at 2023. I'm just going to make a note here just so we know and expect, we can know what to expect here. Let's go ahead and run that. And as you can see, this time, now we actually have some data that's pulling in. We've got our date created here. And then we also have this other function that we pulled in to give us the current snapshot. So if for whatever reason you're trying to pull a report and you wanted to say, hey, this is when the report was pulled, you can kind of throw that in there as a dynamic date function to provide a little bit of context to the users that, hey, maybe there's some, if there's any changes that happen to the data after this date or, before this date, it makes a lot of sense as to, what day you're actually looking at. So a little bit more of a debugging thing here, but that is how you would use dynamic date functions within a live database. Okay, so to wrap things up here, I have provided this link in the video description. You can go ahead and look at this resource. You can download it. It's just hosted on GitHub. So feel free to check that out, and hopefully you find it valuable. I certainly have. I use it almost daily in my job. Again, it's really useful for all things when it comes to reporting, ETL, different things like that, where you need to have rolling windows of time, and it's really just a valuable resource. So thank you for tuning in. Hopefully you found this valuable, and we'll catch up with you at the next one.